AirWorx is a truck lettering sign business. I do murals, airbrushing. That's what I'm kind of been known for. But my majority of my work is truck lettering and signs, murals, you name it. If you have something to paint, I can paint it. I love challenges. So I started AirWorx while I was in Florida visiting my sister, and I met this gentleman, Ralph, who was doing hand lettering with enamel paint and making signs, and I was just like intrigued by what he was doing. And he was a real quiet, shy guy, kind of kept to himself, but he kind of let me peek over his shoulder at what he was doing. And I remember clearly I left his shop one day and I'm driving down US 19 in Brooksville, Florida, and I saw this big sign company with all signboards on the outside of it. It said General Sign Company. And I said, you know what, I'm just going to pull in there and see if maybe I can get an apprenticeship or something. And so when I did that, I pulled in there and I met a gentleman. A gentleman greeted me at the door. And when I approached him about like what would it take for me to become an apprentice, he looked at me and he said, "How old are you?" And I said, I'm 27. I just spent 8 years in the Navy, but I was wondering if I could, what it would take to become an apprentice. And he looked me dead in the eye and he said, "You're too old to start in this business." He kicked me to the curb right there on the spot. And I was just so frustrated when I left there. I drove away saying, I'm going to prove not only to myself, but to this guy that I'm not too old. And that's kind of really what kickstarted my whole career. That negativity turned into a positive thing for me when I got back to New Jersey. I had a friend of mine ask me to letter his van, and I said, "Sure, I can letter your van," and I didn't really know what I was doing, but sure, I can do it. So what I did was it was a Saturday afternoon, and I looked up in the yellow pages, I looked up a local sign guy. And I have to mention his name because he's part of the reason I'm doing this, and his name is John Mokas. And he actually gave me my first can of lettering enamel. With a chuckle, he gave me a couple cans of paint, and off I went. 14 hours later, I had lettered my friend's van. Might have been a little crude at the time, but that's how I got my beginning. From that van, he had a friend who owned a restaurant in Newton. Jean Pearson owned Barrister's Restaurant, and she was willing to rent me a small little shop space behind the restaurant. And that's kind of where I hung my shingle. I started my business in November 1988. Officially, January 1st, 1989 is my anniversary date of when I started my business. Some of the challenges I met, head on when I first started my business was I literally didn't know what I was doing. With a couple cans of paint, I built myself a little sign kit. I ordered more paint, and I just started to learn, practice, and before I knew it, I was getting referrals. Customers were coming in to letter their trucks. And now I could do shirts, I could do trucks, and little by little, I just started increasing the volume of stuff that I was doing. I figured if I could afford the rent for the month, then, or I broke even just to start off, it was okay to me, and I was doing that. So for the first couple years, I rented the space off of Gene, and then I found that the next year I was able to move up on Spring Street into another little shop. And as I grew, I got new customers. And early on, I couldn't afford to advertise because I was young. I was, just starting out in business, and I didn't really want an extra expense. I had a Yellow Page lady come in and want me to put an ad in the Yellow Pages. And I tried to explain to her, look, I've only been in business a few years. I don't really have the money to advertise. Most of my business comes from word of mouth or my business card. This lady got so perturbed with me, she threw her pen at me. She's like, "You'll be out of business before you know it, blah, blah, blah." I'm like, okay, I'll take that chance. When you put out a good product and word of mouth, people are going to refer you to someone else. I always told them, I said, if you're happy with the job, just tell one person And then I figured if each person that told one person, I would always have work. I found that year after year, I was gaining more clientele. I need bigger space. At the time, I didn't really have a garage. I was lettering stuff outside until about my fourth location, which was on 206, right down from Hayek's. Johnny Walker Paving had a building and he rented me the front office space, and I was able to use his garage to letter my trucks, which was huge. That really helped my business grow because now I had an indoor place where I could letter trucks. And back in the day, we used to when we letter a truck, you would do it on butcher paper. And you would pounce it out with a pounce wheel, and then you take chalk and you chalk the impression on the side of a door and you would hand letter it in. That was pre-computer. I would say about 4 years in, I got a visit from my good friend John Mokas, who gave me my first can of paint. And he walked in my shop and he said, I've been seeing your work around for the last 4 years. I'm getting out of the business and I would like to give you this. And he gave me his paint box, his paint kit with paints in it and brushes. In that moment, I realized, wow, I'm doing a good job. I'm doing what I need to be doing, and people appreciate my work. So to get a compliment from a guy like John, who was in the business for 30 some years, that meant so much to me. Now I outgrew Johnny Walker's Paving, so now I found a shop. My brother Tom does window tinting and car detailing, and we wanted to combine our businesses under one roof. So we rented a place out on 94 in Lafayette where we both moved in. He did his detailing. I did my truck lettering and my signs. And business continued to grow to support the rent, to support, the overhead, and still make a living. Spent quite a few years there before we moved again. Now he outgrew the building. I outgrew it. We moved up the street into a brand new building, once again expanding our business. Now I'm not only doing shirts, truck lettering, signs. Now I'm doing boats, motorcycles, you name it. People are bringing me all kinds of stuff to do. Then the recession hit, and I couldn't afford to pay the rent no more. So I actually had an opportunity to put up a home studio, and that's where I have been running my business for the last 18 years now. The business has grown, and I'm still a one-man shop doing, I call it the A to Z. I do everything from taking the trash out to finding the job, doing the job, paying the bills, emails, phone calls, it's all on me. So at the end of the day, I'm one guy doing the best I can, but I can also guarantee you'll get the best that I can give. People come in my shop and they don't realize, oh, you can do that? Oh, you can do that? You don't just do trucks? No, I do quite an array of different things, from signs to truck lettering, murals. I do home murals in people's houses. Now I incorporated about 6 years ago doing laser engraving, which opens a whole different world to me as far as what I can offer to my customers. Doing like weddings, cake toppers, cutting boards, picture frames. I could go on and on. There's just so many different uses that the laser allows me to be creative. I do a lot of airbrushed on motorcycles, from flame job to, I want skulls, I want, whatever. You come with the idea, I design something and make it happen. And I like the challenge of these jobs. Each one is different. I'm not doing the same thing every day. I had a tree in my yard, and I've always been intrigued by those chainsaw guys. I'm like, wow, how do they carve into a tree like that? So I had a tree topped in my yard many years ago, and I told the tree guy, I said, leave me about 18 or 20 feet, because someday I'm gonna carve it. And what I ended up doing was I drew up a sketch of, like, I thought, since it was by the swimming pool, I would maybe make 4 or 5 different sea animals in the thing. Well, I ended up with 15 different sea animals in this tree. And then it was all like, okay, am I going to stain it all the same color? I was like, no, I don't want to stain it. I think I'm going to airbrush the whole thing. So I airbrushed 15 different sea animals on this tree, and it, ended up in the newspaper. People would come up on the weekend and come to our front door and say, "Do you mind if I take a picture of your tree that you carved?" And it's what it's all about. I love the opportunity to make people happy. The silo in Lafayette, that was probably one of my biggest jobs to date. It was 14 feet wide and 28 feet tall. The silo was an old silo to a barn that had fallen down years ago, and the historical society decided that they wanted to clear the property and just leave the silo but have someone paint it. They approached me about painting some historical buildings and stuff that went on in the town years and years ago. They wanted to incorporate it all on the silo. The Maybe House, which is a historical house in Lafayette, that I had to incorporate on here. I had to incorporate a barn, like a farm scene. I had to incorporate a train from back in the day when the train used to come through town. I had to incorporate one of the first structures in the town was this old gazebo that they wanted a picture of this gazebo on this. Of course, I was, again, I love the challenge. So I was like, yeah, I'm on board with it. Did up a preliminary sketch, which I thought they were just going to keep to themselves. Little did I know they took a picture of this drawing that I did on a piece of paper with markers, and they put it in the newspaper the next day and said, "Look what we're having done in the town of Lafayette." And I'm like, okay, pressure's on now. The most challenging thing was that it was concrete, and it was not only just concrete, it was corrugated concrete, which means every 6 inches was cupped. I had to physically tape out every line that was horizontal to make a straight line. It was just impossible. It would take too long to do freehand with your brush. When I first started, like any drawing, it looks a little rough because I'm just laying down the base. And I have to say this because I was getting heckled while I'm doing this by people driving by, yelling out their window at me, saying, "It looks like blankety blank." Well, yeah, that's because it's the first day. In my mind, I'm telling them, come back in 2 weeks. All right? So continue on day to day. It was during June. It was beautiful weather. Went there for 12 days in a row. Painted the silo. Came out beautiful. One thing I loved about that job too was it kind of made that town. It kind of made it like an icon, like a point that you had to see. You had to go to Lafayette to see this. There's not a week that goes by that someone doesn't mention seeing the silo. Now, 9 out of 10 people don't know when they're talking to me about it that I'm the one that painted it. And now it's funny because my wife will be asked, "So what does your husband do?" And all she has to say is, "Well, the Lafayette silo? Well, my husband painted that." So on the other side of the silo, they had hung an American flag. So for a few years after I painted it, this flag would hang there and it would get faded and they'd have to replace it. And then a few years ago, they approached me again. They said, "Hey, do you think you could paint the American flag on the silo?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I would love to." So again, I took the challenge. I came up with the idea of I wanted to make the flag, instead of hanging just down like normal, it would just hang. I wanted to give it some movement. I wanted to make it look like it was actually waving. And of course, they were on board with that. So here I go again. I got my brushes, got my paint, get up there, and 3 days I created this flag, and man, it's a lot of people pass it every day, and it just gives me a lot of joy to think that everybody that sees it enjoys it, and it made that town just a little bit sweeter to drive through. The biggest job I've ever done was Mount Olive High School. They had approached me to paint their concession stand with the Marauders logo, and so I did this 12 by 24 foot concession stand, all hand painted. And it came out great. So they were like, "We love it. You ready for your next job?" And I'm like, "Sure." And they pointed over to their new multi-million-dollar football field that they just installed. And with that, they built this beautiful grandstand. This grandstand was 30 feet tall. and 220 feet wide, 14 times the width of the silo that I had just painted a couple months earlier. Now, talk about a challenge. Well, I took the challenge and I made it happen. The logo alone was spanned about 40 feet wide, and then it had to say Mount Olive Marauders. I believe there's 19 letters in that full name. So I had to hand paint their name in 9-foot tall lettering. I was painting on not a flat surface. This was black corrugated steel that every 10 inches or so protruded out an inch and a half. So there was no taking a brush and just making a straight line. If I wanted to make a straight line, I actually had to take masking tape and tape that edge, then take my brush and then peel the tape. Now you do that over and over and over again. I mean, it was quite a challenge. The other challenge for that was that the size of it, the paint going onto a black surface. The letter, they had to be a certain color. They wanted the letters to look distressed. They wanted the letters to look like they were weathered, like they almost had holes in it. You know, it wasn't just like paint a flat letter. This was almost 9 foot tall by however wide each letter was, to make it look like it was shredded almost. And then when I got done with that, I decided, that the lettering needs more. It just looks too plain being like a cream color. And I sponged the entire wall. You're talking, at that point, that was probably 12 feet by 220 feet wide. Took me 3 days just dipping my sponge and giving that, textured look to the wall. I couldn't set up scaffolding because then I'd be right on top of it. So we rented this machine that allowed me, to go up and down, and I could back away from it to get some perspective. Because try to paint a 40-foot logo alone in the center and make it look like a pirate's head. Well, on corrugated steel, it was a bit challenging. So what I did was I took portions of that job and just say the marauder's head, and I would just pick out certain parts of it, and I would lay it out on my computer, and I would scale it that way. And then I would make like a pattern for just that section. And then this way I could judge off of that the rest of how big it was going to be. And it came together very well. And I got to say that was probably the most challenging, but I was able to take the challenge on, and I was able to create it and complete it to their liking. So when people come to me with a loss, they lost a family member, or they want me to design something for I've done a headstone for a lady who lost her husband. But those are the ones that really hit me in the heart. Those are the ones that, I try to go the extra mile for. And to me, when someone loses someone in their family, I don't have the heart to even charge them. The most meaningful one came from this lady and her husband who lost their son in Afghanistan at 23 years old. And she had everything she could do to come up my driveway and ask me if I would paint his truck in memorial to him. That was probably one of the hardest jobs that I had to do, and the most meaningful, because for Chris and Dawn, losing their son, I just couldn't imagine. So I ended up, they gave me some ideas what they wanted. They had a Toyota. They came to me, and I said, just drop it off. And I spent, I don't know, probably a week on it, designed, different things, particularly pertaining to his life and career. Even though it was short, it was a very meaningful life that he lived. And when they came to pick it up, of course, the tears, they're crying, I'm crying, all emotional. And, they said, well, what do we owe you? And I'm like, you don't owe me anything. And that was just, to me, that's how I feel I give back. To people who have loss or grief like that. I want to grieve with them. More recently, I just got a helmet from a lady whose son was shot at 8 years old. And so now I'm actually in the process now of painting this helmet for her husband to remember their son by 8 years old. The Donahue family, they had this cross that they put at his gravesite, and it's covered with photos. Well, I did all them photos. I made these collages for him and stuff. So it's the jobs like that that really impact me the most. But to me, it's not about the money. It's making people happy. That is my main drive in my business. I love to make people happy. I love to turn their vision into reality. I want to say 99% of the time people are, wow, that's more than I ever expected it to be. As far as you creating something that I had written down a few things on a piece of paper and you brought it to life. It's just amazing. If you're trying to get a hold of me, the easiest thing to do nowadays, my phone number, 973-875-4455. I can be reached by email, AirWorx, AirWorx @ptd.net, or a Frisbie, Frisbie 9560 @gmail.com. And the process is pretty simple. For instance, if you're looking to get your truck lettered, I ask you for a picture of your vehicle, side view picture. I ask you if you have a logo. If you don't, I can design you a logo. I would superimpose it on your truck and send you back an email with probably 2 to 3 different options so that you can get a visual. I felt like doing this years ago just helped my customer be able to see what it could look like in the end. You could change, the colors on it or do whatever you want. But at that point, we'll just work together on that until final approval, and then we'll schedule you your truck in to get lettered, say, or signed, whatever the case may be, and go from there. As far as retirement, I've been in business 35 years. I love what I do. I love to make people happy, and I want to continue to do that. Being self-employed, it's really not an option right now. Maybe semi-retired. I'm going to stick with doing this as long as I possibly can. It is a God-given talent. I didn't go to school for this, and God have all the glory because every job I do, He gives me the ability to do that. And I mean that honestly. I wake up every morning thanking Him for the opportunity to be able to be creative and use my talent to the best of my ability. And it's because of Him that I have the ability. But I also be remiss if I didn't say I wouldn't be doing what I do without the support of my wife, Lisa, and my family. And without their support and their love, I wouldn't be doing what I do. And I love what I do, but they allow me to love what I do. And I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart.